I've had a random week this week. Someone turned up at school here waving a handful of cash at me to buy my car off me, and couldn't look past the cash, so I took it and he took the car. And then I went home and thought, that was pretty silly. How am I going to take my board to the beach? Oh, I got $800 for it, which is pretty good for the car, considering there's a lot of rust in it. But still, how am I going to get the board to the beach? But as the old saying goes, happy wife, happy life. So the other random thing was I entered a competition for some reason, and not thinking that I would win the competition in Melbourne, and I won the competition in Melbourne, which I couldn't fly down to and go to. It was an AFL competition with a big fanfare of the finals footy on a big screen, and couldn't get a flight back in time to preach here, so I thought I'd better stay here. None of the other pastors would take my spot and preach for me. Not true. I actually wanted to stay. So I've been crying myself to sleep for the last little... Not true. Anyway, this has nothing to do with my message, so we better get started. But I want to invite you this morning. To be open to change. It's hard to change. It's hard to change attitudes. It's hard to change beliefs. But this morning, I want to invite you to maybe reflect on yourself and maybe be open to doing what the Lord asks you to do. That's all we can do. Let's pray. Father, I thank you that we're all here this morning and that you have a word for us, that you want to speak to us. I thank you that we're your children and you desire to teach us things through your word and through people who share up here. And I pray for an open spirit, and I pray for open ears to hear what you would say to each one of us today and how we can shape our lives to be better Christians and to follow your ways better. In Jesus' name, amen. Anytime you want to bring my PowerPoint up, you can. So I was at school a couple of weeks ago, and I had a student walk into my room, and he was quite excited, and he goes, "Guess what, chappie?" And I was like, "What?" He goes, "Oh, I just went down and to the Manly surf rowboat titles, and we came third." I was like, "Wow, that's awesome." I didn't know much about surf rowboating. I knew he'd been in it, and he goes, "Do you want to see a video?" And I said, "I'd love to see a video." So I sat down, and he came over and he showed me a video of some of his heats. And as I was watching the video, I became quite impressed at what they actually do. It's a sport that I haven't really watched a lot of, but as I watched it and as he was talking to me about it, I became extremely impressed at how they do it. And today I have brought a little clip of one of his heats. And I want to ask that you watch it carefully and have a look at what's going on. So if you want to take a title for my message, it is Row, Row, Row Your Boat. Can I encourage you to take notes and reflect over it?
Take him up! Go with him, Brendan! Go with him! Go with him! Go with him! Go with him! And row! And row! And row! And row!
Pretty impressive, isn't it? Now, I don't know, like, I've seen them every now and then off in the distance, and I have never thought there was so much stuff that goes into it until I watched this video. And as this young fella was telling me about it, I couldn't help but draw the links to church life. And I was like, wow, there is so much correlation between what they do on those boats to how we should be as a church. And so today I'm going to share some of the lessons that I learned from listening to him and from looking into surf boat rowing about what we can learn about church life. The first one is that a boat crew trains often. As he was telling me about what he does, he told me that he meets with his crew 6 to 8 times a week. That's a lot. He trains between 2 to 3 hours a day to get up and do that. It's a strong commitment to get in every week, to get out on the boats and to row. They train their fitness, they train their technique, they train their strategy, they train their attitude. And he said to me as he was telling me about the training that they did for it, a quote that really stuck out. And he said, you can't do it if you don't come together often. You can't be a surf boat rower if you do it once or twice a week. You won't work. You'll hurt yourself. Now, I've been involved in church for a very long time, over 20 years. And before I got married and as a young fellow, it was my involvement in church, and I don't mean just coming to a service once a week, I mean coming to youth, there was times there when I was doing 4 services a weekend, not to mention everything else that I was doing in the life of the church. And being involved in a church kept me on the straight and narrow. It kept me away from temptations. It kept me away from getting involved in a life that probably would have drawn me away from God. I was listening to a podcast last week about the Melbourne Demons. It's an AFL footy side. And they were second last on the ladder last year. And they had a prelim final this year, which is the weekend before the grand final. You win that and you're on the big show. And they were talking about what changes they made this year and why they've come so far. And he said to me the reason that they've had the success they've had this year was because a whole crew of them decided that they would come and do extra training sessions. They wouldn't just do what was required, but they would come in extra time to put in the extra work. The question I want to propose to you this morning is, how much do we as people want to see this church impact the community? How much are we actually willing to put into it? Hebrews 10:25 says, and let us consider how we may spur. Now, I love that word because I think of those cowboys who've got the spurs on the end of their shoes that jab them into the horse, and when they do, the horse takes off. Let us consider how we can spur. Maybe we need to walk around with little needles and stab each other every now and then. How may we spur one another on towards love and good deeds, not giving up? And the word there in the Greek is not abandoning, forsaking, leaving behind or deserting the meeting, which is the assembling together as some are in the habit of doing. Now back then, there was a lot of persecution on the church and people had stopped meeting together. But encouraging, pray for, comforting one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. Now, as I look at church, as I look at young people and the trends that are happening around now, what I'm noticing is the opposite. I'm noticing that people are starting to discuss and argue that church doesn't have a place in society. They're starting to say that they don't need to be involved in church. They're starting to attend church less. They're starting to meet with others less. And I think that's a dangerous place to be. Meeting regularly as a church, assembling together here, whether it's at a connect group, a small group, whether it's at a working bee, whether it's at multiple services here, whatever it is, it develops us as people. It's our training ground. The more we meet, the more we will develop as individuals. I wonder what is your reason for not meeting up or assembling as a church more often is. Is it life is too busy and I don't have the time? Our culture these days is so flat out that we argue that being at church for one service is enough. That's all we've got time for. Is it doesn't work because I've got kids? It's just too hard to get them here. Is it it's not necessary? I don't need to spend a lot of time meeting with other Christians around church. Or maybe it's an issue of what your peers may think. Maybe we need to consider why we don't get involved or meet more regularly. I remember when this church was built up there in the classroom, and there's a few here that would remember that. Every morning we'd have to set up the whole place for church because it was a classroom. And then every Sunday evening we'd have to set the classroom up and pack everything away. That took hours because there was sound gear that had to get set up before the practice even started. Chairs had to go away. But sometimes I think maybe we need to do that again. Maybe just pull the chairs all away and then set them up again every Sunday morning, because what did is it created a bond of friendship with the people that came and got involved. And what I found was that through my time of involvement, God does more in my life, or God has done more in my life through me serving than any message that I've listened to. I know the arguments about why we shouldn't be involved and volunteer is often in church. And I'm all for having a balance. But I think we have to be careful that it's not an excuse. We cannot underestimate the importance of coming to our training ground and being involved. I know people here that have given a life to going away and doing things. Ken, the guy on the sound desk there, he went away with iron and clay for a year. Did you get a lot out of that, Ken? He's nodding his head. It wasn't just about him serving, but he got a lot out of giving a year of his life to going around with a ministry. And all of us that have been involved in a big way in doing things would say the same. Not only that, he met Rochelle. Which brings me to the second point. The strong relationships are the foundation. So as I quizzed this young guy on what makes a boat crew great and how does it work, he said to me that you form a real bond with your crew because of all the training you're doing, because of always being around each other. And he said, this is what he said. He said, you spend so much time with each other, you have to get along. I wrote this down as soon as he said it because it was powerful. You have to get along. You have to work out your differences and you become like family. Another quote from another crew member that I read in my research was this: the best part about joining a rowing crew is that they become your family. I've met my wife through the club and I'm proud to call everyone mates. You come to trust everyone out there in the boat. You have to. Your life depends on it. Just maybe your life depends on being involved in church. and building relationships here. I met Renee through church. Used to come here and hang out with the young adults, doing small groups and Bible studies, and got to know this person, Renee. And then I think it was at a small group or a worship practice session where she actually stitched me up quite well. She said to me, "Oh, it's my 25th birthday and I'm not doing anything." And me, being the gentleman I am, said, "Well, we can't have that. I'll take you out for dinner." I know, I'm a nice guy. Very nice. My birthday's coming up too. So I took her out for dinner and I bought her flowers, which is the right thing to do, isn't it? Bought her this nice big bunch of flowers. We had a great night. We went home. She said, "Do you want to come upstairs?" And, you know, she's with families and stuff, like a whole heap of people there. Heather was living with her at the time. And so I said, "Yeah, sure." So we went upstairs, me carrying the bunch of flowers. And we go to walk inside the door, and the worship team had decided to put on a surprise party for her. This is our first date. We had talked about keeping it quiet. We walked into the house and I just said to her, "I guess there goes that idea of keeping it quiet." And I still remember to this day Karen Murphy, she's not here, but Karen Murphy's face as she had this big giggle look on her face, and if you know her, you know what the look is like. And she looked at Renee and I and she said, "What's going on here?" A strong bond was formed by being at church. Part of our vision and our mission as Coolum Family Church is to be a family church. That's why we're called Coolum Family Church. It's part of our vision and mission. Another part of our vision, and you can read it as you go into the toilet, the vision's all there for you to check out, but a key part of our vision is in building relationships, is to have people connect and belong here. It's a place where we want people to feel like there's a family-friendly environment. We want to have a culture of love, respect and unity. If you run a small group now, a connect group, a Bible study, I want you to stand up. Come on, there's more of you here. If you have a small group, ladies group, men's group, connect group, stand up. A place where people can come and be involved. There we go, that's better. I was about to start naming names. Yeah. Have a look around. There's stuff happening here at church. Can I suggest that if you're here and you're looking to build stronger bonds and stronger friendships, that you see one of us and you get involved in a small group? You can sit down now, thank you. One of the most comments I get from people when they, not about this church of course, but when they go and visit other churches, is that either the church wasn't very friendly or I couldn't find any friends at that church. We have a responsibility as a church to be friendly. We do. Absolutely. To the new people that come here, we've got to make them feel welcome. We've got to look out for them. We've got to talk to them. But other people have a responsibility too. If you only ever come to one service, you come late and you leave straight away, you're not going to make strong friendships here. I have a couple of kids here at church, and if I was just coming to this one service, I wouldn't know any of you. Because half the time I'm just running around kids. At the end of church, it's time to get them home because they're going to sleep, and if they're not asleep, they should be asleep and they're running wild. My conversations usually is, "Hello, how are you?" as I'm running from one end of the building to the other. And when I'm not chasing kids, I might be just sitting down and catching my breath. Before the next 2 minutes, I'm going to be chasing them again. So if you just ever come to a Sunday morning service, you're not going to make strong relationships and friendships. Another quote I read from a crew member said this: "Many boat crews have all the potential to do well, but due to a disagreement or a falling out within the crew, they split and they never reach their full potential." And I've been around churches long enough to see that the reason churches split, the reason small groups break up, the reason people leave ministry teams, churches, is because of disagreements and the inability to be able to resolve and work through a conflict. And when that happens, it hinders what God is doing. The enemy is around us, trying to destroy unity, trying to destroy a bunch of people building strong relationships that are spurring each other on in God. The enemy doesn't want it. Here's a few facts for you. We're going to have personality clashes in church. With this number of people, it's going to happen. Here's another one. We're going to have conflict. We're going to have disagreements. We're going to have difference of opinions. We're not going to see eye to eye. But the key is how we respond that makes or breaks this church. And if we want this church to be a church that's seen in this community, we better get our relationships right in here. We better come with humility, with a willingness to be able to work on ourselves. That's what they say about marriages. If you want your marriage to get better, don't try to fix the other person, fix you. That's what we need to do here at church. Love each other, build strong relationships, be willing to forgive. Don't let these disagreements cause us to walk away from a ministry, a small group that destroys what God is doing. Colossians 3:12 says how we should respond. It says, "Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you." Wow. "And over all these virtues, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity." Powerful, isn't it? Maybe we should all write that on our hand when we come to church. Show each other a little bit more grace. We have to guard against the enemy destroying relationships within this church. Number 3. Everyone has different skills and roles. Let's have a look at the surf boat. The front guy has agility and balance. He's able to adjust to the conditions, react quickly, and deal with the unexpected. The first middle person needs to be powerful and have a good sense of timing. The next middle person needs to be powerful and synchronised with the back person. And then the back person before the guy standing up needs to have a feel for the water, set a good flow, rhythm, adjust stroke rate, type. And then the sweep, which is the guy standing up, leads the crew. When I looked at the surf boat rowing before I spoke to him, I thought it was just a matter of a bunch of guys jumping in a boat and going for a row. But each position is unique, has strengths, has weaknesses, and needs to work with everybody else on that boat to make it effective. If the back decides not to have a good rhythm, they don't get into any sort of momentum. If the middle guys decide they're going to lie on their oars, the boat doesn't have any power. If the back guy hasn't got a feel for the balance and keeping the boat stable, they'll tip. If the lead guy called the sweep isn't there, the boat won't go anywhere. Together makes the crew. 1 Peter 4:10 says, "Each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms." Everyone in church can do something and has a role to play. I went and did a kids' soccer camp, a primary school soccer camp, a couple of months ago now. And I was coaching this team of boys. And we were on the field and everyone wanted to be the striker. It's the end thing. To be Ronaldo or one of the famous European soccer players, they had to be a striker. And they were all like, "Oh, I've got to be a striker. I'm a striker. No, I'm a striker." And everyone had to be a striker. And so I tried to give them some positions, but throughout the game what would happen was 3 or 4 of them would end up standing up near the goals. We're all strikers and we're just going to stand up at the goals here. And there was this one guy who was left to do all the work, to defend. And usually that was the guy who actually should have been the striker. We all have a role to play in church life. We all have gifts and talents. If we don't bring them to church and use them, then we'll find that people are trying to cover us doing things that they shouldn't be doing. And we want this church to be effective and to reach out into the community. We better bring all our gifts and talents together and use them in the right way. 1 Corinthians 12 says, "There are different kinds of gifts, but the same Spirit distributes them. There are different kinds of service, but the same Lord. There are different kinds of working, but in all of them and in everyone, it is the same God at work." I wonder, are you using your gift? Are you contributing to what we're doing here at Coolum Family Church? Another quote from a boat crew member, and he said this: "Everyone needs to work together in complete harmony to win. Everything has to be aligned perfectly." Our church will only be as effective as our ability to be able to harness the talents and gifts that are in this place and use them. We don't need to look at the person who's preaching or the person in the worship band and try to be someone we're not. The whole saying, the grass is greener on the other side. For a long time I wanted to sing. I do, I like worship. I wanted to worship lead, I wanted to sing. But I can't sing. And you don't want me to sing. You don't want me to sing at all. Let alone worship lead. Yeah, be quiet, Grandad. He's heard me sing. But I realised quickly that I got my own set of gifts and talents. Whether it's kids' church ministry, whether it's youth, whether it's serving, whether it's cleaning. It's all important. The funny thing is, I think about school and the school has a whole heap of people doing a whole heap of things. The people that don't get often recognised are the cleaners. And I always say to them, because they always talk to me and say, oh, we don't have a very important job. No one really talks to us. No one really likes us. And I always say to them, what would the school be like if there was no cleaners? What would the toilets be like? I don't know, has anyone seen Teenage Boys? Their Amy is not particularly straight. What would the schools be like without cleaners? Don't underestimate your role and your gift. The last one I'm going to talk about this morning is there's a leader. I'm going to show you a little video of a leader leading some of the boats, and then it's pretty amazing what they actually do. So watch what he's doing and check it out. Sometimes I think that's church pastors holding on to the edge of the boat for dear life as it goes the direction it goes. I had a good laugh when I saw that, and they work hard. And at times, the crew are in there just, we've caught a wave, we've got some momentum going, we can relax a little bit, but not the leader. He's going hard, making sure it keeps going. So he's called the sweep. And his responsibility is to steer the boat, to understand the sea, to encourage and spur on the crew. Do you remember the video from the beginning? He was always talking. You always watching what was going on and telling the crew what to do, and not in a dictatorship, but in a way that was getting them to do empowering them to do what they needed to do to get the job done. They were ensuring the rowers were safe, picking the right lines, communicating what was happening, enthusiastic, setting the rhythm. He knows the skills of the rowers and the weaknesses. He has strategy and enthusiasm. And the lad in my room said to me when I asked him about the sweep, he said to me, we have incredible respect as a crew for his role and his responsibility. Do you know it's an incredible responsibility to lead a church? Sometimes we sit there and we make comments on it without really thinking about the responsibility and the weight that's on the shoulders and on Rod's shoulders to lead this church. I watched Richmond, who were the favourites to win the AFL Premiership this year, lose on Friday night. They've won 22 games straight. They won the grand final last year. No one could see a team beating them, but they lost. The minute they lost, it was 10 minutes after they lost, one of the commentators started talking about whether he had made the right decisions, whether he was the right person for the leadership role. They've had a year of great success winning the premiership. They've had a great year. Yes, they didn't make it to the grand final, but 10 minutes after that one loss, he's being criticised as a coach. I couldn't believe it. But sometimes I think that's what it's like in church. You come to church for a service, the music's too loud, it's the pastor's fault. There's not enough praise songs. There's not enough worship songs. The sermon went too long. The sermon went too short. The sermon had too many scriptures. The sermon didn't have enough scriptures. It wasn't engaging enough. The sermon was I don't know, whatever. Wasn't enthusiastic enough. There was not enough people on the door. They talk about money too much. I feel sometimes as people we look for faults instead of the good. And I wonder if we changed our attitude a little bit to one of supportive, honouring of our leadership, what might get done instead. A good crew honours and respects their leader. Do we give, as a church, Rod and the rest of the pastors here, enough honour and enough respect? Is our attitude towards them one that empowers them to lead this church into having the influence that it's called to have in the community? What are our conversations behind closed doors, when they're not around? The one or the 1-on-2 or 1-on-3 conversations at lunch or barbecues. What are those conversations that we have about church? Is it negative? Is it full of criticism? Hebrews 13:7 says, have confidence in your leaders and submit. That word submit means to yield, surrender, not resist to their authority, because they keep watch over you as those who must give an account. Do this so their work will be a joy, not a burden. To submit is actually not an act of weakness. It's an act of strength. Look at Jesus. He had to submit to his Father's will and die on a cross. And that act empowered Jesus to die for our sins so that we don't have to. He paid the price for us because he submitted to his Father's will. And just maybe if we submit to our authority, that will actually empower us to do what God's called us to do. That will empower what's on our hearts. I've always found that submitting to authority empowers me to live a greater purpose for what God's got on my life. Think about the sweep for a moment. He can direct the boat as much as he likes. He can push that oar as much as he's like, but if there's no one in the boat to row, it's not going to go anywhere. It's not about importance of positions. It's about responsibility. Without the rowers working hard and listening to what he's saying and calling, there's going to be no progress with the boat. To the rowers of the engine room, and every good engine room needs somebody to steer it to be effective. The truth is, we need leaders. We do. As a whole, we can be far more effective coming together than just one or two by ourselves. But to do that, it needs to be led. And it's not an issue, like every role is just as important as the other. It's not an issue of importance in roles. It's certainly an issue of responsibility. We've got to honour that responsibility that's on our leaders that God's appointed. So do we empower the leaders of this church to lead effectively? Do we submit to their authority in order for God's purpose to be revealed in us and through us as we do that, and this church? I've got a couple of friends that have done home churches, and they've all come up to me and said that their home churches have been great for a while, but there's no purpose in them. Or not no purpose, but there's a lack of purpose, a lack of direction, and a lack of impact than being involved in churches. Yes, churches can be funny places, it can be hard places, but together, when we're coming often and training and preparing and doing the work, when we're building strong relationships and using that as a foundation, when we're using our skills and roles and we're honouring the leadership, we can be something that makes a massive and incredible difference in our community and in our homes that are around us. And that's something that inspires me to be a part of and to be involved in. I'm going to leave it there at that today. I want to come back to the first comment that I made at the start. An invitation to be open to change. I'm just going to give you 10 seconds to just reflect on what I've shared this morning. And just ask yourself, is there something that you need to change? Maybe an attitude, maybe a perception. Maybe it's get more involved. Maybe it's just to write a thank you note to Rod or Tim and say, we honour your leadership. Father, I thank you for what you're doing in this church. I thank you that this church is going out to have a great influence in the school and the parents that come here and the staff that come here and out in the community itself with the many different things we do to reach and to impact people's lives. And Lord, I pray that we will be willing to get on board on what you're doing in this church. Lord, we will see this place as a home that we want to be in and spend time in, to build strong relationships with each other, to be a thing that jets us into the future that you have for us. Lord, I pray for everyone here that maybe if they're thinking that they don't have a role to play or a gift and ability, Lord, I pray that you show them what they're good at. You show them what role that they can play, Lord, in your kingdom and through this church. Lord, I thank you that you've given us Pastor Rod and Pastor Tim. Lord, that you've appointed them as leaders of this boat, this church. Lord, that you've empowered them, Lord, to have strategy. You've empowered them to encourage us, to direct us, to guide us. I thank you, Lord, that you've given them wisdom and guidance. Lord, we honour them this morning. We ask that you help us, Lord. You help us for the rest of this year and into the coming years to be the church that you've called us to be. In Jesus' mighty name.